Questions? Answers? You see? If it happens with adults, it's really going to happen with kids. Yeah, unless you want to talk about others, I'm going to only cover the last three. Autumn. Quick application. Question number 11. God can turn your bad day into a day of?
Rejoicing.
Even when you have?
A bad day.
Children.
Oh, yeah.
Question 12. Another application. Gary, if you are ever in a position of ability and authority, use it for?
God.
Yeah. Anybody else? Anything else? There we go. And George Bosworth, I guess. Chapter 10. What more happened to Mordecai and why?
He was second in command, and because of the peace and his purpose, because of his purpose for peace with his people.
Yeah, his purpose for peace with his people.
Question 9, you said, what did the Jews not do? Obviously take the plunder. And what might an objective observer infer about the Jews, about this for the Jews?
Yes. Their motive would not have been anything other than self-defense. You know, if I go and, like Abraham, when Abraham
That was the
went.
exact thing I thought of. I thought of Abraham.
Yes.
Like, does that really fit there?
Well, Abraham would be an illustration of what I'm thinking of here. I mean, it says 2 times they didn't take their plunder. The point was, they didn't want the plunder. That's not why we're doing this, okay? At least they would reason that much from it. Now, what else they might reason, I have no idea. But at least they could get out of it, look, we're not killing you because we want your stuff. Now, I guess they would have to make the jump to, we're killing you in self-defense.
Wasn't there something in the law of Moses about, wasn't there the way they plundered managed under the law? Weren't there rules about how they plundered? What they could plunder?
Well, when they plundered, so yes, vaguely there are rules, but that was when they were going into Canaan, you know, they would have to give to the Lord.
I couldn't remember exactly. I didn't go
Yeah.
back and look. I was
It
kind of
wouldn't-
wondering if,
Right.
my first thought was maybe that there was, I was not in my head, I couldn't think of anything, but I thought, well, maybe they were still practicing some of the law. But as I thought about it more, I thought, I can't actually remember a spot where that would be a part of the law, so forget that. So.
Well, I said, what might an objective observer infer about this? Okay. All right. Oh, by the way, what more happened to Mordecai and why? And George said he was promoted because of his purpose of peace with his people. Or something. I think I threw in another P in there because that's fun. But I'll say this. A lot of the story is about who? Mordecai. You keep on seeing his name pop up here and there and everywhere, and the idea is Mordecai's growing greater and greater. So that's worthy to be mentioned. I will say this. If on my grave it says that I was one who sought the good of God's people and one who spoke for the welfare of his whole nation, then success, right? As long as it's accurately stated. Okay, I'm not going to deal with these questions here. Maybe somebody else has one. Okay, chapter 3. So we got to do some cleanup here. Chapter 3, you know the story. Mordecai doesn't bow down to Haman. So Haman, filled with rage, spends, did you calculate how long it was he spent thinking about this?
Way too long.
At least a year. In chapter 7, the first month in the 12th year, in chapter 3, verse 7, first month, 12th year. Same chapter, verse 12. First month, so a year has gone by, okay? It was cast for, verse 7, in the first month, in the 12th year, the lot was cast before Haman day to day, month to month, until the 12th month. And then in verse 12, it says in the 13th day of the first month. So for an entire year, he's been thinking about this the whole time. More about that in a minute. What he comes up with is, this guy won't bow down to me, and so I'm going to commit genocide. I'm going to wipe out a nation. Now, that might sound a tad bit unreasonable, but it was not so much without precedent. We have talked about how Darius, this guy's Xerxes' predecessor, Darius, when he assumed the throne, it was a coup. It happened very quickly. What had happened is, there was a guy, an imposter, his name was Smerdis. Smerdis, the real Smerdis, was killed in Egypt, and an imposter who was a magi, a magician, he realized, wait a minute, nobody back home knows who Smerdis is, what he looks like, and that he's dead. And so he says, I'm going to become Smerdis, and I'm going to go back home. He was a magi. So when Darius and the coup happened, when they were running out of the room the same day, they killed the magicians and cut off their heads. They left all their wounded where they were, partly because of their inability to move, and partly so that they could guard the citadel. The five in the coup, with the magicians' heads, ran with great shouts and clamor and called on all the Persians to join them. They explained what had happened and showed the heads. And at the same time, they killed every Magian that they met. The general body of the Persians, finding out from the seven what had taken place and the deception upon them by the magicians were in on the Smerdis imposter. So now all the Persians that are in Susa find out, and they thought it fit to do like the seven. They drew their daggers and killed wherever they found a magician. If night had not come on, they would not have left a single one alive. This day, the Persians now, so this is 150 years later, the Persians now celebrate publicly more than any of their holy days and conduct a great festival on it. It's called by the Persians the Slaughter of the Magians. On it, no Magian dare appear in public, but they must keep strictly to their own houses, or else if they go out, they're going to die. So, one guy here doesn't bow down to another guy, and so the ruler says, you know what I think I'll do? I think I'll kill everybody in his race. Does that sound like justice?
No.
That's not justice. Does it sound like something they did? Yes. Have you ever heard of draconian laws? The idea is they are extreme. Draco, who ruled across over here in Greece, the idea was death was for everything, almost. If you stole a cabbage, you were killed. He was asked, why is the death penalty the same for stealing a cabbage and something like murder? And he said, well, because stealing a cabbage is worthy of the death penalty, and I can't think of anything greater for murder. That was his answer. Now, in the Bible, have you ever heard the expression, or let me rephrase, what expression, what law did God give to?
Eye for eye, tooth for tooth.
How is that interpreted now? If you walk up to somebody out there and say, what does eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth mean? What will they think it's trying to tell you? Revenge.
Revenge, yeah.
That's not at all what it was. It was to curb many laws in the law of Moses where, look, you guys are coming from draconian type, this excessive extreme, and God is saying, no, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Deuteronomy 19, which is one of the places who exacted the eye for the eye, or the tooth for the tooth, or the life for the life? Do you remember? What was the process it had to go through?
The law, the courts.
The court. Exactly. This was not about vengeance. God says, look, you guys are living in insanity down there. Let me give you some stability by saying, no, we're going to be just. Okay. That's all I wanted to say about that. Comment or question on anything so far that we've hooted and
For the
hollered about?
approach of a power-hungry potential second-in-command ruler, this is probably a reasonable. I mean, yeah, not just,
Yeah.
but you want to assert your authority wherever you can. And I mean, he's obviously fighting tooth and nail to come across as top dog. And this would get the point across.
Yeah.
You know, it would do that. Which is what makes it so amusing to see how, I mean, he's scrambling and clawing and fighting and scratching and, you know, God didn't want it that way, so look what happened.
Yeah.
Okay, so in chapter 3, we've talked about what I'm going to talk about in chapter 3. Chapter 4, Mordecai learns of the plan. He learns of the plan. In verse 5, Esther summoned Hathach from the king's eunuchs, whom the king had appointed to attend her, and ordered him to go to Mordecai to learn what this was and why. And so in verse 8, Mordecai gave the eunuch a copy of the text of the edict which had been issued in Susa for their destruction, that he might show Esther and inform her, and to order her to go into the king to implore his favor and to plead with him for her people. In verse 11, she replies, look, you know what the deal is. And then she says at the end of it, I have not been summoned to come in to the king for 30. If the rule is, if you go in there, if the king's in a bad mood, you're dead. I haven't been summoned in 30 days. Mordecai replies in verse 13, do not imagine that you in the king's palace can escape any more than all the Jews. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise from the Jews from another place, and you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether or not you have attained royalty for such a time as this. Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, go, assemble all the Jews who are found in Susa, and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maidens will also fast on the same day, and thus I will go into the king, which is not according to the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went away and did just as Esther commanded him, and you know the end of the story. A couple points from this. God's work needed to be done. God's work needs to be done. Could you imagine being the person who doesn't do the work when you're in the position to do the work? That's what this story is about, right? Look, could you imagine? I am reminded of a couple passages. Matthew 21. Verse 28, what do you think? A man had 2 sons, and he came to the first and said, son, go to work today in the vineyard. And he answered, I will not. But afterward he regretted it and went. And then the man came to the second and said the same thing. He said, I will, sir, but he did not go. Which of the 2 did the will of his father? And they said to him, the first. And Jesus said to them, truly I say to you, that the tax collectors and prostitutes will get the kingdom of God before you do. Here's the exact same situation. Here's somebody who is in the position to do the work, but when the work was there to be done, didn't show up. I'm also reminded of Romans chapter 11. So in Matthew 21, Jesus is saying to them, look, the kingdom is going to be taken away from you and given to somebody who do the work. That's the idea of it. Romans chapter 11 looks on the other side. Now that the kingdom has been taken away from them, verse 17, Romans 11:17, some of the branches were broken off. Some of the Jews were broken off, and you, that's being the Gentiles, being a wild olive, were grafted in among them, and became a partaker with them of the rich root of the olive tree. Do not be arrogant toward the branches. See, their perspective is, oh, yeah, the Jews messed up, and so God got rid of them and took me. And there's some validity to the idea behind it. Yes, God did. They messed up. God got rid of them. Or they rejected God, however you want to look at it. And yes, because of their sin, we can be grafted in. Verse 18, do not be arrogant against the branches. But if you are arrogant, remember that it is not you who supports the root, but the root supports you. You will say then, branches were broken off that I may be grafted in. Quite right. They were broken off for their unbelief, but you stand by your faith. Do not be conceited but fear. For if God did not spare the natural branches, he will not spare you either. Behold then the kindness and severity of God to those who fell severity, but to you God's kindness, if you continue in his kindness, otherwise you also would be cut off. And they also, if they do not continue in their unbelief, will be grafted in. This text is actually about how they can repent. But in this big story of how they can repent is a warning. You who are in there, they were rejected by God for not doing his work. I would hate to be the person who, when the work is there to be done, it's right in front of me, This is what Esther's situation is. The work is right in front of me. Here it is. Now's your time to rise to the occasion, and I end up absent without leave.
Lee.
Yeah.
And there's people watching.
Mm.
You know, there's people who, just run the harem, or whatever. And obviously that's no more is told to us, but you they're watching,
Right.
They know.
And even if they don't know at the time, because she has
Right.
not yet exposed herself, later on, they'll say, wait a minute, I know what you did. Yeah, people are watching. When she says, I have not been summoned to come to the king for these 30 days, summarize that as an answer. He says, go in and summarize her answer. No. No. What is behind or underneath her answer? Why does she say no?
Fear.
Fear. Right? Fear causes us to, you fill in the blank.
Pull back, yeah.
Pull back, yes, pull back. It causes us, she wanted to escape this fear. And so she thought, I know how I'll escape the fear. I won't put myself in that position to begin with. Have you ever been there? God's work requires it all the time. You're driving the bus, you're at home, you're going shopping. It doesn't matter what you do. You're always out there doing. God says, here's your work. And it happens to me all the time. Oh, man. I'm a little nervous about this. Here's something. Two things. If she had not, because of her fear, possibly she would lose her eternal life. But even if it wasn't that bad, what in this life would she not gain? Every time, because of whatever reason, especially fear, every time because of fear, you don't do God's work, what do you lose?
Strength you would have had from food.
That's a little, you didn't go to the gym that day. You didn't go to the gym that day. So the point is, not only, so because of fear, we pull back. And because we pull back, at worst, we lose our salvation. But even if that's not it, I'll lose that one time going to the gym. And in the end, I won't be as strong as I could have been, right? Anybody have a comment or question? Interrupt.
There's the phrase, faint heart ne'er won fair lady.
Yes.
Faint heart ne'er won anything.
That's right. Right. So she says, all right, so what was she had fear. You ever been there? You ever done it? Yeah. What did she need?
Strength.
She needed to exercise her strength, her faith, however you want to look at it, right? Right. She needed, this is a situation where you say to yourself, when you're here's the fear, you say to yourself, I can do all things through him who strengthens me, right? So she apparently gets the faith. Last week, I did not mean to diminish Esther at all. This is my impression of her, right or wrong. My impression, like Gary was saying, she was well trained. I think that she's an illustration of good training and what happens when a good heart that's been trained well gets challenged. She's been taught, you do what you're commanded. You do what you're commanded. I don't know how many big challenges she's ever had. All I know is the record of this one, and so I'll speak to this one. She's been doing what she's been commanded all the time. The record, they're not really that difficult. This one's huge. And, as I would do, at first I'm like, no! But then she rises to the occasion and she obeys in faith. This is what happens with young children, right? We've got to teach them when they're young. You submit. If they say jump, you jump. If they say don't jump, you don't jump. And that's what we teach them when they're young. And then when they get older, they will be able to apply that in faith to when it really matters. This is a beautiful illustration of the circle of life, if you will. So, In faith, she says, go assemble the Jews, fast for me, and we'll do the same things here. And then if I perish, I perish. So if you got a big scary job to do, prepare your heart, prepare your mind, pray for God for his hand in it, get help from other people, and then don't forget to go do the job. Right? Did it work? Did her process work?
Of course it did.
You know the rest of the book. The point is, we all go through this. There's something there I don't want to do. I'm scared. I don't know if you're scared or whatever the case is, I don't want to do it. But if you go through the process, this is an illustration that if you do what you're supposed to do, God will do it on his end. And you'll meet in the middle. I have learned to take confidence. I don't know how much I can say God was working in my life, but I can see times where I did certain things. And then it was preparatory, if that's the word. Here's the process I did in preparing to go tackle this task. And I prepared, and I prepared. And then, hey, I get the task, and I was met with favorable results. And the more I do that, the more I realize, hey, God's working. You know, he was working there anyway. But now I realize it, right? So this is one of those things where you realize, no, the system works. So do it. In faith, do it, right? Romans 8 says, if God is for us, who is against us? It also says in the same chapter that we know that God works all things. God causes all things to work together for good for those who love the Lord. That seems to be Esther. Esther says, look, if I die, I die. I'm going to work for my God's people. And God worked with her. Ephesians 3. You know, I'm guessing that nobody in this room is going to have to go through a beauty pageant, live with the king to save God's people. Right? But we all have our little fights. Big fights. Nothing's little. They're all big. And that's the parallel. Ephesians chapter 3, verse 14. For this reason I bow my knees before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and earth derives its name, that he would grant you, according to the riches of his glory, to be strengthened with power through his Spirit in the inner man. Look, you've got your fight. And Paul says, I know you've got your fight. But I pray that God will strengthen you. Verse 20. Now to him who is able to do far more abundantly beyond all that we ask or think. Right? He can give you so much strength that you won't know what to do with the excess. Right? We could go on in this. I do want to go to one last passage. 1 John 5. 1 John 5. These things I have written to you who believe in the name of the Son of God. Verse 13. I'm sorry, verse 13. 1 John 5:13. So that you may know you have eternal life. Listen. This is the confidence which we have before him, that if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. And we know that he hears us in whatever we ask. We know that we have the requests which we have asked from him. If it's in his will, and you ask for it, the answer's done. Now we know some things that are in his will. And I could ask you to name a list of them, and that would be applicable. But I'm impressed with what the context here is. Verse 16. If anyone sees his brother committing a sin not leading to death, he shall ask, and God will give for him life to those who commit sin not leading to death. The idea is this. There are some people who are outright rebellious towards God. And he says right here, I'm not saying you pray for them, not the same way. But then there are some people who are dancing in places they shouldn't be. They're allowing themselves to be influenced. They're making poor decisions. and we get down on our hands and knees and say, God, Joe here, or Jolene, whichever, and you can be a Joe making the prayer or a Jolene making the prayer, I'm praying that you will continue to be patient with this person. And God, in His will, now some will we know and some will we don't, He'll work it out. I'm impressed by that. So I know I can pray, Lord, help, give me strength to overcome this temptation. And He will. But that's not this text. This text is, He hears your prayers. Well, what's the problem? There are some people who are being deceived. And there are deceivers there. And you know there are deceivers there. What do? Well, you counter it doctrinally, you live the right way, and you get down on your hands and knees and you say, God, there are some people being deceived. Please have patience with them. Comments or questions? All right, chapter 5. Oh, I'm sorry, before we go on, why didn't Esther ask the rest of the wives that were with her, the harem, whatever that was, to also pray?
Were they Jews? We don't know that.
Because
You're not brethren.
they're not brethren.
Right. We don't know.
Right.
I mean,
Some of them,
some
there's some women in there
that are not.
that are not. They had nothing in common. Essentially, they had nothing in common. I'm going to ask, we're talking about the same thing. I hope I can ask this question clearly. She feared the king would not even listen to her petition about saving God's people. Under what different circumstances would this have not been a problem? Let's assume that somebody was trying to kill them all. Somebody in high power in the kingdom. Everything else is the same, except for one thing's different. Huh?
God's promise.
Maybe that's not what I'm going for. Who was she married to? Or who wasn't she married to? A Jew. The point is this. If he had been a Jew, if he had been Mordecai, a Mordecai, she would not have had to have worried about whether or not he would hear her petition, because her husband would have been concerned already about God's people. If she were married to a Jew, no, I'm not saying that she could help it. That's not what I'm saying. But can we? That's my point. Right? Yeah. Here's an illustration of when you're married to the wrong dude or dudette. Now, in this case, she had no control. But she did well. But in many cases, look, even though it worked out in the end, wouldn't it have been so much nicer if she didn't have to worry about that with her husband to begin with, and they could just both go into being united, a front against this, right? The point is, be careful who you choose, right? Who you choose to live with, who you choose to marry, so on and so forth. Just another illustration of that. Okay.
Just a second.
Yeah.
You had mentioned she didn't ask any of the harem to pray.
Yes, some of them, he says, his maidens.
Maids and I.
Yeah.
Well, likewise, were they Jews?
Right.
Yeah, I don't know. We're making an assumption here.
Yep. I and my maidens will also fast. Yep, you're right.
I mean, I realized that she had a little control there.
To a certain degree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To a certain degree.
Yeah, although there are probably other, in fact, I know he has another wife at some point. Two other wives. One of them's gone. Vashti is gone. But I don't know if it's at the same time, so I have to be careful.
Well, he has multiple concubines. I mean,
Right. Okay, from chapter 5. It came about on the third day. So we're picking up in our story. That she puts on her royal robes. Verse 2, she obtains favor in his sight. Verses 3 and 4, she asks the king. Verse 4, if it please the king, may the king and Haman come this day to the banquet I have prepared for him. And so they come, In verse 6, they drank wine at the banquet, and the king says, what do you want? Up to half the kingdom. And verse 8, she says at the end of it, tomorrow, please come and I'll do what you say. So there are three strings of thought here, three lines of thinking in this next two chapters. One is Esther. The other one is Haman. So now we cut to Haman. Verse 9. Haman went out that day glad and pleased of heart. Yeah, the queen had just asked him. Ooh, and you know how much he likes, the attention. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he did not stand up or tremble before him, Haman was filled with anger against Mordecai. And he goes on home and he says, I know what I'll do. I'll make some gallows, right? I'm gonna kill Mordecai now. Chapter 6. Here's the third scene. During the night, the king could not sleep. By the way, it's been over a year, and it may have been something like 6 years, okay, since Mordecai helped the king. It's been between 6 years and 1 year. We don't know how much. Over 1 year. During that night, the king could not sleep. So he says, here, bring me the records. I guess that's what he wanted to use to be put to sleep. Verse 3, the king said, what honor or dignity has been bestowed upon Mordecai for this? And the king's servants who attended him said, nothing has been done for him. So the king said, who is in the court? Haman's in the court. This is what, everybody loves this. You can't help this, right? So Haman comes in all puffed up, says this is what he's done. And then verse 10, the king said to Haman, take quickly the robes and the horse, as you have said, and do so for Mordecai the Jew, who is sitting at the king's gate. Do not fall short of anything of all that you have said. So Haman took the robe and the horse and arrayed Mordecai, and led him on horseback through the city square, proclaimed before him, thus it shall be done to the man who honors the king. Then Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman hurried home mourning and with his head covered. And I am reminded of a passage that says, God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Humble yourselves in the sight of the Lord, and he will exalt you. Oh, I'm sorry, we didn't get there yet. We only got to God is opposed to the proud so far, right? So, he goes home. You know the story. Verse 14, while he's talking about all the horrible things that had happened, do they get him to come to, his bad day's about to get worse. Chapter 7, verse 1, the king says, they're at the second banquet. Verse 2, what is your petition? Verse 3, the queen Esther replied, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given to me as a petition, and my people as my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, to be annihilated. Now, if we had only been sold as slaves, men and women, I would have remained silent, for the trouble would not be commiserate for the annoyance to the king. Another line that you gotta love. Then King Ahasuerus asked Queen Esther, who is he? Where is he? Who would presume to do thus? Esther said, a foe and an enemy is this wicked Haman. And Haman became terrified before the king. So the king goes outside. Haman is begging for his life. The king comes back in, misunderstands what's happening, apparently, and gets even more ticked off. Verse 9, one of the eunuchs who were before the king said, behold, indeed, the gallows standing on Haman's house, 50 cubits, at Haman's house, 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on behalf of the king. And the king said, hang him on it. So they hanged Haman on the gallows, which he had prepared for Mordecai, and the king's anger subsided, and the story's not done. On that day, King Ahasuerus gave the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews, to Queen Esther, and Mordecai came before the king, and Esther disclosed what he was to her. The king took off his signet ring, which he had taken away from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Again, we read the quotes, right? God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And humble yourselves in the presence of the Lord, and he will exalt you. This is a perfect illustration of that.
Pride comes before a fall.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
Oh, I was just, I.
Yeah,
I'm sure you
go-
had 100
go
things
to it.
say. What Haman's wife tells him, I find very, very interesting. If Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, basically, you're dead.
yeah.
And it's like, what did she know about the, you know, it's just like, what was it that Ethan knew about the Jews that, I don't know.
I can, my wildest shot at speculation is it got something to do with what just happened with Daniel chapter 1 through 6, where multiple times letters had gone out into the entire kingdom saying, hey, there's something about Jehovah and these Jews. Now, do I know that for sure? No, I certainly don't. Maybe she was a prophet like, was it Ahimelech? Who's in the New Testament that prophesies about the death of Christ? You know.
Killing one instead of the whole nation dying.
Yeah. You know, maybe this is, although it doesn't say it at all. You're right. They obviously knew something about the Jews, right?
Haman knew he was a Jew.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's good, because that's why he done it for the Jews.
Right. Right.
Look at the, consider the miserable existence of a shameless self-promoter like this guy. When he goes in with his friends,
How do you really feel about it?
no, I mean, and Haman recounted to them the splendor of his riches, the number of his sons. So what do you do? Sit there for an hour and say, I have 10 sons, me, 10 sons. I mean, what is that? I understand the importance of the sons, particularly then. But who really does this? I mean, there's a moment in here where I feel really sorry for him. And it's his fault, he's an adult. But when you asked to describe Haman, what I thought of was the kids in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. I mean, like he's the classic spoiled brat. And I mean, but even for all this, I cannot be happy because,
Yeah.
I mean, he's not a happy man.
No.
He's successful by everybody else on earth, except for the king, would consider him more successful than now. And he's not a happy man, and he's obviously miserable to be around.
Yeah.
And it's just sad.
So there's a lesson there in pursuing worldly things.
Yeah, right.
Who would do it? The one who lives by the motto, the one who dies with the most toys wins, but is not an atheist. Because the one who believes in a God will then attribute the fact that he has everything to divine blessing. And so he'll say, oh, the gods are for me. This is how Alexander the Great ends up thinking that he is literally a god. Because nobody else has ever done anything that I've done before. Look how fast I conquered. Look at what I've done. He would travel with his couches, literally, to impress the people. Here comes a king. This king is coming. He brings his own couches. Right? And so they end up with this mindset. Nobody's ever done this before. And people start telling them, oh, you're something special. And it goes right to their head. So it is very similar to what's happening right here in America right now, except for they believed in gods. Right? I'm impressed with this. I'm impressed with the lesson from it. I'm not impressed with... I asked the question, describe Esther. Really, I'm getting at her approach. She's got to go in. So when she actually goes into the king, describe her approach. Anyone?
As to, what do you mean, like, this side? I kind of believe it. She's like, I'm going to go in there, and I'm going to, like, wine and dine him a little bit, and I'm going to make him think about it for the next day. Kind of idea. Before I tell him the answer. So the king is like, really, what is, it's like, really, he's working on it, right? And then she tells him, it's like, roar, then it's like.
So, you might say there's some wisdom in that. What strikes you as, coming from a godly perspective, a little ungodly about her approach? And you said it.
Wine?
Wine didn't dine him.
Yeah.
multiple times. These are banquets. By the way, in our translations, it doesn't come out very well. These are drinking banquets. That's what they're doing. They're drinking wine, okay? Just like in chapter 1, you know, all the wine that was flowing everywhere. Now, not to the same degree, but her approach is including wine. Now, what do the Proverbs say about wine, which she would have had access to? Especially about a king. It is not for a king, O Lemuel.
That's right.
Right?
Wine is a mocker. And
Wine is-
so over and over again.
Right. So, yeah, Proverbs 31, you know, it is not for kings, O Lemuel, it's not for kings to drink wine. Now, I'm guessing, okay, so if Mordecai was teaching her the law, then he read through Proverbs with her, you know, I don't know. I don't want to go too far in my speculation. But a couple different places in the Proverbs it says, look, stay away from this stuff. Okay, and so she does the exact opposite. She uses it in, I don't know to what degree, but not to Proverbs, not to that degree.
Right, but she uses it in the lesser degree to the customs of what they're accustomed
Right.
to.
Right,
And the king is accustomed to this wine drinking.
right,
Whatever. That's what they did.
yeah. So, but still, God had spoken on this. He had spoken on this. Yet she used it. Yet God allowed it to be used in His providence to have the end result that His people were protected, right? Can you think of anybody else who did something that was a sin? That providentially led to the protection of God's people?
Rahab.
I'm thinking of Rahab.
When Moses struck the rock, did water still come out?
Didn't what? Yes.
Water still come
Right. Right. Yeah, and that's an interesting one. Right. There you go. There's another time where God uses these situations where, and there's some of them we can show, like Moses is, not Rahab's, probably not hers either, I'm guessing, but Abraham, you should have been able to reason through this and not use that lie, but yet God used it. So what I'm impressed with is God is patient. Have you ever done anything dumb that God has allowed you to do and used, and the end result brought glory to Him, and you look back and say, man, I should have done that differently. I should have done that differently. God is a patient God, and so I'm thankful for that. Here seems to be one of those situations. All right. Anybody else comment or question? We've got 5 minutes left, but it's Thursday night and everybody's going to sleep. So,
I find just a trivial thing. The king says this twice, up to half my kingdom.
Yeah.
Or was that something he just said?
um,
You know, I mean, they say
Yeah.
that, up to half my kingdom. I mean, who else said it?
Herod.
Herod said it, yeah. You know, what were they really going to give? You know, was Herod really going to give half his kingdom to this big bad girl? I doubt that.
right. Dude.
He likes her.
Of course he does.
I mean, it's just kind of fun to see, you know, Esther wants a banquet, grab Haman, let's go have a banquet with Esther.
I am reminded again of Abraham when he barters or dickers for the
Yes.
for the field. Oh, what's an exorbitant amount between friends? You know, they're using the language of the day, but if you look at it, you realize no, he's ripping them off. You know, so I'm sure it's just a. In the back of my mind, there's something that tells me that I've read that outside of the Bible. Either him.
That half my kingdom thing?
Yeah, but I need to be careful. It's just in my mind that's full of cheese right now. Cheese head. Yes. Comment or question? Anybody else? We'll call it a night. We'll pick up. I'm not going to talk about much in 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. You know, obviously I haven't talked about much in each text, okay? Mostly because a lot of it is an inspired account about a pagan. And so I'm kind of...
You'll get back to your question about the providential thing.
Oh, yes,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, I figured that.
Yeah, save that one.
That was the end.
That's right.
Grand finale.
That's the grand finale of our Bible study.
I will say on the up to half my kingdom thing is, there's
Yeah, and that's what, in fact, that's what Haman is doing. If he's recounting, look at all that I have. You know, if somebody walked in that he liked, he'd probably say, I'll give you half my kingdom for, you know. Just a bunch of hyperbole. Are we singing another song or are we done? No other song. Okay, Steve, will you lead us in prayer?